Hey everyone, welcome to Outlaws, the High Times series that dives deep into the renegades who built cannabis culture from the ground up. I'm Holly, and today we're sitting down with Nik Erickson of Full Moon Farms, a true Humboldt legend who cut his teeth growing under Moonlight, dodging the law, and perfecting terroir-driven craft flower long before legalization. Let's step into the hills off the Highway 36 and meet Nik. Oh, Nik, thank you so much for joining me. I am super excited to have this conversation today. Nik and I met, I think, a couple years ago now through a sungrown collective in Humboldt called Humboldt Family Farms. And I had a little bit of a chance to get to know Nik, and your story has really stuck with me. So I'm super excited to connect with you today and hear more about it. So thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Tell me a little bit about where you are, what you do, and yeah, then we'll get into some of your backstory.
Currently, I'm sitting on the homestead out here on the farm. My main farm, I call it my kind of my old OG legacy farm. Um, when legalization first kind of came into existence in 2017, we we picked up a secondary microclimate. Right now, we have three small farms in three very distinct microclimates, so we can really kind of focus on what cultivars do well, where, and why, and we can kind of steer each genetic to that microclimate, kind of to draw the best from it, the best that we can draw from it, you know. And so I'm out here in Dinsmore, California right now. I've been on this property since about 93, 94, working with one of my neighbors back in the guerrilla growing days right out of high school. At that point, it was just kind of, grow enough to get by. Prices were up, and, you could, as long as you got away with something, you were making a little extra money. We all had, 9 to 5s back then, but as long as we could grow a little bit to take on dead tour or whatever, that was fine by us. So it was very, very humble beginnings. Technically, I'm the second generation farmer, 7 generations in California. Our family came over in 1853, along with kind of a famous trapper, Jim Beckworth. They migrated over into the Sierra counties, Plumas counties, and they've stayed ever since. The great grandparents, some of their very first deeds, property deeds for their ranches and farms, it was pre-currency in California, so they would trade vegetables. You had to have a commodity, so their deeds were like you have a balloon payment of carrots or potatoes, and substance, because the only two things here were gold or food, that you really needed to strive for, and the gold transitioned into food. So they'd make land payments with vegetables, and they stayed ever since. And I've got kind of a deep history both on my mom and dad's side, from the Mendocino coast up here in Humboldt and Plumas counties mainly. I I've always been interested in this plant. It's always been something that was kind of normalized from early on. My dad used to grow 6, 7 plants in the backyard when it was a big no-no, and I remember earliest memory in life. I was 3 years old, and it was my dad's garden being raided, and the cops came in, yanking everything out. My swing set was set up right there, so I could kind of, kick my feet up through the fan leaves and really just didn't kind of enjoy the garden space. But, they were stepping on our food sources, and we grew up really, really poor. So, the gardens were needed. That was our, supplemental substance in the wintertime. And I didn't understand what was going on, why our house was being wrecked. And so I think just because of the sheer impact of that kind of shock and awe of like, why are, the police are supposed to be good people, why are they doing this to us? And I didn't understand that, what was happening with that plant.
Why were they there? I mean, like, what?
It was actually a bunk warrant. So I think somebody turned my dad in. He got off because of the warrant being falsified. But it was an awakening. So from that point on, like, we didn't really talk about weed again until I turned 18. He always smoked it, but he kept it from me. Like, he kept it pretty guarded.
Did you quit growing at that point? Like, no more home garden?
If he had, yeah, nothing at home. But when I was 14, It was 1988. I took some seeds out of a brick bag that we got. You know, it's just some good old fashioned across the border love, and sprouted a few and got a female out of it. And I grew my first sativa plant. Kind of up on the mountain behind our house. We lived right up against the green belt, and it was just a wide open nature behind us. So I went up there at 14 and grew my first personal plant. And you know, you want to show off at 14. So I of course brought a lot of my friends up to take a look at it, and one of them ended up taking it about 4 weeks before harvest. And I heard he microwaved the immature flower, and
Oh my God.
and that's how my first plant ended up. So from that point on, you know, we quit showing people where we were growing the plants.
Yeah.
Lesson learned early.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that sounds just about right. I'm assuming your dad maybe didn't know about this little secret.
No. This was on my own venture. We didn't really reconnect on cannabis until I turned 18, and just like, he was trying to keep it sheltered. I mean, you know, you could smell it here and there. You knew when the family was all taking a walk before dinner or whatever. We're very aware of that.
Yeah. You're smoking, he's smoking.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about this. Like,
no. I mean, and I moved out when I was 17. I had my own house when I was 17, at the end of my junior year, and when I turned 18, you know, Quincy didn't have a lot of great cannabis in it. It was still a lot of the Mexican brickweed and stuff, and I brought him back some green bud from Humboldt, and that was just kind of his Christmas present, and that's how we broke. He just, you know, there was no real conversation said. It was just like, here's a pipe, here's some weed, maybe a pop, you know, and that was it. And then from that point on, we went from kind of father son to friends. He's like, okay, we're good again.
We're level now. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so growing up, like, was this in Quincy, like, were your peers' parents also like into weed? Were you guys like unique in this sense at that time?
Nothing. It was always personal. It was always personal plants, right? It was very different than, you know, transitioning over to Humboldt, and where, you know, if you grew up out in the hills and you grew up on a homestead, it was your ancillary money. You knew never to talk about it. You know, that was a very big hush hush thing, and you know, I knew I had friends that when they were, you know, 15, 16, you know, they were being given, you know, a few plants in the garden to tend to, and that was going to go towards their either college fund, or that was going to go to, you know, towards a new car or whatever, you know. So they kind of learned right away, like, oh, this equals, you know, some form of benefit to me also, not just, you know, the medical side of it.
So what about, okay, so this experience you had with this raid when you were little, I mean, I can picture this, like when you told me that story, you know, I can picture this like little kid just on a swing set, like life was simple. And after that time, like, even though the warrant was bunk, that's a pretty traumatic experience. So did you always, like, growing up, associate cannabis as something that carried like inherent danger and was like a scary thing? Or was it more like fuck the police from a very young age?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, I mean, you know, I'm a latchkey kid, so I was given, you know, I was that generation of freedom anyway, you know, where you really had the world to explore during the day, and you could use your mind, and you could come up with your own thought processes, and, you know, you had peer influences, and there wasn't social media, so you were interactive with your peer groups, and you know, everybody kind of developed us against them very, very early on mentality. But, you know, we were, you know, for the most part, you know, beer was the predominant thing in our high school. You know, I mean, we did have, you know, brickweed and stuff around, but, you know, beer was our, you know, so we were outlaw kids, and from the beginning, you know, everybody wanted to go out and have a keg and a bonfire, and, you know, the tailgate parties and just that small town vibe. And so, you know, and of course the police were always trying to break those things up. So, and it was usually some of our friends' dads also. It was a very small town, so you knew who the officers were. They knew who you were, and it was just that whole cat and mouse game began with, you know, the kind of high school party scene, and then, you know, later it moved into how do I hide these plants from these helicopters?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's jump to Humboldt. You moved up there in 93, you said?
93, yep.
Okay. Yep. What was the goal? Why did you want to move to Humboldt?
I knew that I had family up here, and it was really interesting. It it wasn't necessarily just the cannabis. I was chasing they have a really good construction tech program up here. So I was thinking, I'm going to get into, just building houses. And I remember we had a career day at high school, and somebody came by and was like, just handed out a pamphlet of these giant, just majestic redwoods in the fog with like rhododendrons underneath them. I'm like, that place is beautiful. I think I'll just go there. And 3 days after graduation, I did. I just packed my bags and drove up here with a friend, and had a couple of friends who were up here already, and just hit the couches and began work in construction. Started going to school. Realized that I only stayed with college for probably a year and a half my first time through, and always grew a little bit on the side. I was nervous. I definitely had the fear of what could happen. So we always stayed smaller than everybody else. We were very, very cautious. A lot of our activities back then were at night. You didn't have water line laying everywhere. Sometimes we'd pack water out to our gardens and waterbed mattresses, in the back of a truck. And, just leaving as little footprint as possible, not trying to get into your gardens the same way twice. And we were very, very, very cautious. And, it was warranted. There was, you'd be flown 5-6 times a year by the helicopters. They were always over the top of us. And you'd be surprised at how well they could spot small gardens. 10-pound patches. Sometimes you'd lose a 10-pound patch that was, waist height plants, and they were integrated into, smaller trees and brush. And it's just like, man, they were really on you back then.
So what? I'm trying to picture kind of, I didn't make it out to Humboldt until, I think 2010, and had been there several times before, but 93, that's a way different time than I'm trying to understand, like, what the culture and understanding was like. Obviously, Humboldt County is prolific and has been since the 70s, but how dispersed are these grows? How common is it for people to be having these tucked away in the hillsides? And like, what happens when a helicopter is flying over? Are they just coming down and butchering shit down? Are they trying to entrap people? Like, what is going on in this?
Well, when they first really started hammering, they were definitely using dubious tactics. They would, fly their helicopters below the 500-foot hard deck. They were running people's horses into fences. There's livestock that were dying because of this, people having to put their horses and stuff down because of injuries, being chased by the helicopters. They really, you got to think you're bringing in law enforcement from all, it's interagency type deal when you're talking about camp, and that's a campaign against marijuana plantation. And they would bring city cops up here that would get to play commando for a little bit. Everybody gets an AR-15. Everybody gets a dressing camo like you're a soldier. Now you're not a cop, you're a soldier. You get special little patches. You get, overtime and hazard pay. And, you get to get together with a bunch of people that aren't part of your normal team or unit. And, it's kind of becomes like a pissing contest for these guys. It's just a chest bumping kind of deal. But, they get to rappel out of helicopters, and it's not that they're rappelling into hostile territory. We're talking back to the landers. We're talking some hippies. There's, loggers and rednecks, they're out in the woods doing their thing too. This is one thing, these big ranches and stuff weren't immune to this. They knew, that there was more money in weed than there was in cows. But, a lot of times, the cops and the ranchers and stuff were in, at least friendship. Maybe you give the sheriff a hunting pass or something, and then he doesn't fly over your place, that type of deal.
Got it. All right, that's a good trade right there, actually.
Yeah, it's great trade, cheap. Better than getting busted.
Yeah.
But the early days, it's, and you got it. So camp would come up, and you'd have kind of an aggressive attitude, I guess is where I'm going with that. And they would put dogs down. If they come onto your land and dogs come barking at them, they just put their dog down. Scaring kids, going through houses. There was a lot of ruckus happening in the early days, and then it kind of transitioned into just basically just the cut and run. If they didn't catch you in the garden, they didn't come back. They weren't there to investigate. They were just taking crops out. And so they would drop in, and that was the era of the nets, and they just lay nets out and cut down what they could and fly it out. And but as long as you weren't caught that day, they usually didn't come back unless there was, maybe something that they wanted to tie in federally, and that was the big question that, during the raids of that time too. Is it the locals or is it the feds? Is, county or feds? And, one of them definitely gave you a lot more trouble than the other.
Help me understand the size of some of these grows. I mean, I'm guessing you also had a lot of other knew other people and had probably seen other growth spots that weren't just your own.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what kind of volume are we talking about here? I'm sure it varied a ton.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think, for us, I didn't mind holding down 9 to 5 and then coming out after hours. And, if in the 90s, if you're pulling 10 or 15 pounds, which is very easy to do now, back then, you put a little more work into how you hit it and stuff, but, it was 5,200 a pound, in Humboldt, and it wasn't trimmed. It was just kind of like you knock some fan leaf off with your hand, and there's these big seed stalks hanging out, and you could count how many buds were in a pound. I mean, I remember, having, 22, bud pounds, and, there's huge colas. It was very easy to make a pound, but, at that price, I mean, you were making more than you were at your job. So if you got away with your 10 pounds, you just doubled down, and then you had a decent year. But there was people that were, in the hundreds, and that was big for back then. Spread out multiple properties, that type of thing. A lot of trespass grows because people were still fearful of having things come back, having the raid come through their gates. And it got to the point where neighborhoods, I knew, people that they'd all pitch in and have like an airplane go up. They'd rent an airplane and have like one neighbor get in and kind of fly the hood and see whose plants stood out more than, are you going to be the one that gets us all busted? Are you going too big? Or, whatever, everybody kind of had like an unspoken, keep it calm. If you had one neighbor who's getting out of control, it's going to attract all this attention to your mountain. And they usually spent the whole day on your mountain. So whether they were just targeting one guy, you might just be friendly fire at that point because they're already here.
That's smart. I've never heard that before. Like, okay, like let's pull together and really get a good view of what they're going to be seeing. I also you mentioned filling up like a waterbed mattress to water. I've never heard that one before. I've heard a lot of, siphoning from rivers and things like that, but filling up a
we would drive 250-gallon waterbed mattresses out from town. I mean, back then it was just, put the fertilizer right in the mattress, fill it up, let it mix on the way out. And I mean, we would sneak over onto like timber property and stuff. There's, a lot of Humboldt County is private, where like Trinity County is public. So it's mostly Forest Service land, which you get in more trouble if you get caught on that. But, most of Humboldt County is either in private land holdings because of big ranches or timber companies, and then there's like a little bit that's state, county, and federal parks. So we would sneak out onto timber property and stuff where they had logged recently, and there was like tick brush or something kind of growing up, and you could kind of weasel down in the middle of those and put plants, and we'd bury water line up to a spur road, and so we could come out at night and not even go to the garden. We'd have a tank set up down there with like a timer, and you could just siphon your waterbed mattress right into your water line that was stashed off the side of the road, never even go near your garden, and you could check it like once a month, come back and just peek in on it.
That's crazy.
But I mean, we weren't as on top of like IPMs and that type of thing back then. Your main goal back then was not getting caught and getting away with something, and it was like,
you get
to
what
be
you
honest,
get.
yeah, and for as many genetics and stuff that were running around back then that were just stellar, foundation cultivars, like, there was, in comparison, a lot of like really inferior looking cannabis because people would cut stuff 10 days immature. They wouldn't let it get all the way ripe or whatever because maybe they got flown and it was still, it'd always sell. You would never roll into the next year and have something unsold. It would always go. And when you're talking about like starting out at like 5,200 a pound, you have room to knock your margin down a little bit and give somebody a $400 break. And, if you have something subpar, it will still sell and you're still doing fine and they're happy. That's just kind of how it was back then. I mean, it was worth more than gold when we started. Gold was, like 250, 275 an ounce. And ounces in arcade at Humboldt State University were like 350 to 450. And so it was worth more than its weight in gold. And, I remember, before every gas station had cameras up and everything was digital, you could go in and trade the clerk, like a $20 bud for a 12-pack of Sierra Nevada or something. You could sell them a bud and grab a 12-pack out of the cooler and walk off. They take buds. So, I don't know if they ever got hung up on their end for that, but I do remember being in an arcade and using weed as currency.
Yeah. I miss when weed as currency was a little bit easier like that. I think I have some tattoos that, were like
Trade.
Yeah. Some of my early tattoos were good cannabis trade.
Oh, yeah.
When I first encountered like Humboldt weed, I grew up in the Midwest. I went to college in South Dakota, like a joint equals jail time kind of a thing. And I had a good friend who had graduated left, went out to Humboldt, and that was her goal. She's like, I'm doing this. This is what I want to get into. And, she found a camp to trim at and blah, 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 ended up growing. And she would come back and bring, she would always say, let's turn some hay into gold. She wasn't the greatest grower. She was just doing what she could, learning too. But I mean, even in the early 2000s, those were $4,000 pounds. And she would bring these balls of hash. And, I would just go out to the bars and carve off shavings of hash and for beers or pay my rent or, But I always remember that turning hay into gold was such a statement that stuck with me because I didn't realize at that point that, like, this was an incredible weed because it was to me where I grew up. This is a whole different. But that was enough to light the spark for me too. That sent me back out there to be like, oh, I want to go and up level this and see how I can be a part of this too, and just interact in this culture.
Yep. The mid 2000s when we're kind of in that 99 plant era, that kind of golden gray zone of, oh man, you get 99 plants any size. That was kind of like the push of the rush and the beginning of the rush, I guess. And there was more and more around. There was fewer and fewer people getting hit because there was so many more people around doing what we were doing. But even like in our local newspapers, the cash and trade sections, like people were openly saying, hey, I'll trade this vehicle or this lawnmower, this rototiller for or trade. And when you were talking about or trade, it was always weed. Right. If they said or trade and no cannabis or no drugs, then they meant, okay, well, we won't take weed for it. But there was a lot of like, hey, bring me, there was enough value to somebody else's pounds. Like, I'll give you my car for your pounds because I'll get more out of it later. Exactly. And it was in the papers. I mean, it was out of control.
That's crazy. Yeah. I love that barter era though too, where it was just a little bit like that was just what it was. Because it like makes me think back to you talking about like your ancestors, where it's like, what do you have that's valuable to trade? Is it food? Is it gold? Is it livestock? What do you got? Because this is our barter system. There's something about that I
absolutely
I love so much. Okay, so looking back to those, I love how you told me about like you were doing all of this under Moonlight, which led to the name of your farm now, which is Full Moon Farms, like a nod back to this outlaw era of yours. Did you, during those years before you kind of came into the light, did you have any like near misses with law enforcement that had you thinking, I got to pull the plug on this, I'm not going to do this anymore?
You have near misses every year. And sometimes it wasn't a near miss. I mean, it was like, maybe product or crop. I mean, we'd get camped on every third year, almost like clockwork. They would hover you every year, but for sure, like every third year, they had to make their presence known up here on this mountain. Driving with product, things like that, before the turkey bag age, before, when everything was in, the gallon freezer bags, just the Reynolds bags, and you could do a half pound per gallon bag. So, take two of them a lot more stinking going on. We didn't have the smell proof bags, that type of stuff. Yeah, it was but I was also, young male in his 20s and just, thought he could conquer the world also at that time, and it's just like not like thumbs up to law enforcement as much. I mean, I kept it, pretty even keel compared to some of my friends, but yeah, you had close calls. I mean, I remember just even transporting, like a 5 pounds to go to a deal would be a big thing. I mean, you were almost, for somebody 19, 20 years old, that's like 25 grand in the beginning of the 90s, and I was going across Highway 299 one time, and I had a candy apple red Toyota wrapped in chrome, and it was like a fishing lure to get pulled over.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I was thinking. I was like 19, and yeah, I think it was 19, 20, and I had a toolbox in the back with like 5 pounds, and it was middle of summer, and I'm going to Reading because I had somebody over in Reading that wanted it, and I was driving with my window down, and I could smell my toolbox. And I was going up the grade into Weaverville, and my clutch burned out. And my clutch started smoking really bad in the truck. I had to pull over to the side, and instantly CHP rolled up, Caltrans rolled up, tow truck rolled up, and but my clutch was stinking so bad they couldn't smell the weed. And I mean, that was definitely a big, still no time. I mean, they probably would have confiscated my truck on that one, let alone going to jail. And I had to spend the night in Weaverville. I had to get, this 5 pounds out of that toolbox and put it in a hotel room and hike it around town a little bit while my truck was being worked on. But there was things like that. I mean, I've had searches happen where, we had things wrapped like Christmas presents, and law enforcement would actually go through the back and were handling the product. They were pulling packages out, and everything was wrapped and weighed differently, and different shapes and that type of thing to disguise it. But we've been searched and had our loads unloaded and reloaded, and they put them back in and let us go. We've had very close calls. I mean, they literally had their hands on the prize and put it back for us. So definitely some close calls.
That's terrifying. That makes me sweat a little bit just thinking about it.
The helicopters are worse because they used to use military air style Hueys, so you could hear those things coming from so far away. It just had that real low thump thump thump, and it just resonated through the canyons. And next thing you know, they'd be on top of you, and kind of coming out of like the underground era. So in the 90s, people were getting chased basically into the indoor. We had this whole Diesel Day era. When we were kind of coming out the backside of the Diesel Day era, in full, when we could start doing greenhouses, like that was such a sketchy thing to let them know that you're going to put up this giant piece of plastic and there's going to be illegal contraband underneath of it. It just put a huge X on the map. But people were like, oh, there's this whole law, it's curtilage. If it's within 300 feet of your residence, they can't search it without probable cause. And there was this whole thing, and you can get 2 runs, or you can do this and that. And so it was like a safer way to go outside, but it felt very awkward to us, from being chased so many times in the past. And, this was before, we were putting snap fans or, any kind of ventilation in greenhouses. And so we would leave the ends off. And so I had this 20 by 50 that just seemed massive to me right in front of my cabin. And my cousin and I would, when the helicopters would come, we had ladders on each side, and we'd have to climb the ladder and just literally physically hold the plastic on the ends so they couldn't see in. So we're on top of ladders, and we'd put our heads down. We'd drop our tailgates so they couldn't read our license plates. And the helicopter would sit above you and just beat you with the prop wash because they wanted to try to blow your tarp off or blow it up enough to where they could see in. So they would just be on top of you, just beating you down. And you just had to sit there and just keep looking down in case they had a camera so they weren't getting picked. Yeah, it was.
That's just that's like a crazy standoff.
Yeah.
That's just wild. They know what you're doing. You know what they're doing. It's like, well, we're having a pissing match right now, and we're not letting you in here.
And they knew that, and they would fudge stuff too. I mean, sometimes gates would get cut that didn't have warrants and stuff, and they'd just be like, oh, we're looking for so-and-so. Is this the wrong road? They knew it was the wrong road. Oh, what's this over here? Oh, now you're in trouble. And I mean, that kind of shit happened all the time. Like, oh, yeah, we just came to turn around. We couldn't get our trailer turned around, so we had to cut your gate. And there was things like that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sure. They're looking for every opportunity possible. Meanwhile, you've built a very interesting playbook for how to operate. Honestly, nobody gives cannabis growers enough cred for the insane amount of creativity and divergent thinking you have to figure out all of these little things. Every time I talk to growers about their little tips, tricks, snippets of whatever they've had to do over years. I'm like, yeah, that's genius.
Yeah. And everybody's got a different story, and everybody's got a different
Yes.
methodology. And then,
That's
yes.
the thing too. That's like crazy. And we talked earlier ahead of our call about like how we're in an oral history phase with a lot of this stuff. Like these stories are important, and yes, you interacted with a lot of other growers. Humboldt's one area. This shit was happening all over the country and all over the world. Like just imagine all these little stories in these little pockets that we're not going to know because, as you mentioned, there's no photos, there's no videos.
Very
Um,
few.
we don't have evidence of this other than the stories that we're sharing right now.
Correct. And, you look at like those that came before us, my dad's generation, a lot of my friends' dad's generation that really fought the hard fight and planted the original seeds in the 70s. And, we're part of the hippie trail and bringing stuff back over from Afghanistan and Pakistan and India and those that were true back to the landers, like real true hippies. I mean, the commune era stuff and the homestead era stuff, the first roundup here, they were risking, decades in prison. Everything back then was federal. It was coming out of the Nixon era. So they were risking a lot. And what they saw transitioning into the 80s and the era of camp and Reagan's just say no and the hypocrisies around that whole drug war, they lived through a lot. They saw a lot. They were definitely disciplined enough not to, take their roll of 12 or 24 pictures down to, the local, Kodak store get developed. So you have to get this history, these stories orally. And, they're of that age now where they're tapping out. Some are passing away. This industry is just not fun right now. So you really got to have a passion for the plant to stay in it because it's definitely not about profit. And some of these guys are just like, hey, it's not worth the time to push the rototiller right now.
So talk to me a little bit about some of the genetics you were growing back then, or were there even was that even really a thing? Was it like I have seeds and I have weed? Because you were talking about pulling seeds out of some brick, but like when did genetics and strains start to become something that were like sought after or thought more about?
The discrepancies between like your typical bricks that were everywhere and green bud, the quality of the smoke and the high and everything was so vastly different that a lot of people, especially younger, even on Dead Tour and stuff, it was just like, is it green bud or does it have seeds? Is it brick? Is it swag? Is it, Bammer? And so, everybody kind of had all these names for brickweed because it was so prevalent at the time. But, green bud was a treat, especially outside of Humboldt County. I know people that would grow weed, sell weed in Humboldt County, and by next spring they'd be completely out and they'd be buying it from their neighbor. So it wasn't like there was this massive abundance of just flower everywhere like we see today. So it was kind of the same thing with green bud. It was just it had is it the chronic? Is it but we had we had haze. And then we had Super Silver Haze, we had Northern Lights and Skunk One and then Super Skunk. And, there was a handful of stuff like that. A lot of stuff around Humboldt, luckily. A lot of parents and stuff were doing their own breeding. And sometimes it would come down to just like Salmon Creek Big Bud. This is, very, where was it from? Alder Point Purple, whatever, or, Tommy's Green, whatever. And it was just like, the guy or the place. And, but some of the actual name stuff, it was the foundation strains. We started getting into the chems and, and then later 90s Granddaddy Purple and a few things like that really stood out. Granddaddy Purple was the first thing I remember that really ran the market, where people wanted it by name. It was everywhere. It was, an amazing plant to grow. People were doing it indoor and outdoor. But but that one really rocked the market for about 8-9 years before OG kicked it to the curb and dominated for probably the next 14 or 15.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the like first strain names I would have encountered from out there because otherwise it was like I remember when in high school for me it was Beasters or Kind Bud. Those were the things you could acquire.
Yep.
Or just straight up swag. Like
Yep.
that was pretty much, the options. But I feel like Blue Dream entered my universe pretty early, of course.
Yep.
But I also remember some GDP and Sour Diesel
Yep.
was and will forever always be my favorite strain. I think probably just because of the nostalgia of, that specific and different flavor that, yeah.
And what I hate seeing too is like, even with sours and stuff, like I know some people have got some real deal stuff out there, but a lot of stuff has been altered. Certain things have been lost in the genetics over time, and it's just doesn't hit the same. It doesn't resonate the same as like the originals. Like it's like where's that old school? Like where is it really at? And we have a neighbor up here that has archived seeds from the early '90s on, and he's just got like catalogs and catalogs of stuff that he preserves, and he does heirloom vegetables and those type of things also, and it's rad. But he's got some really cool stuff, and it'd just be like something from Eddersburg, or the original train wreck and the original pineapple train wreck, from like '06 and stuff. I mean '96. It's fun. I mean, we got some like Alaskan Thunderfuck from '74. We got access to like some Panama Red, some things like that. But it's you got to almost like hybridize because some of those strains aren't meant to be grown where we're at. Like our microclimate is so difficult. And you can take the same genetics that you're growing on our farm, grow it on one of our other farms in a different microclimate, or give it to a friend and 2 hours away in the county, and it's all going to come out different. And we see that through testing, like underlying terpenes becoming the predominant terpenes, and that's going to change your flavor and effect and everything that along with that. And it's really interesting because there's so many parallels and nuances to it that's really like the craft wine industry. It really is. It comes down to terroir, it comes down to inputs, it comes down to climate. And each year is different, and we see it's ever changing. It's one of the most fun plants to watch grow. Like you could grow a humongous veggie garden, you're not going to stay mesmerized as you do with cannabis every year.
Yeah, so I mean, we can say what we want about going from the black market days to the legal days. That is one of the most incredible benefits that we have, is that we are able to learn and observe so much more about the plants and these, and with just thinking about the lab availability that we have and the studies you've worked on with terpenes as well, which I want to hear a bit about. But I want to bridge the gap from those full moon days to the full moon days. Why? What made you want to be like, I want to move this mission forward and play this regulatory game? Like, obviously there had to have been some weight to consider here. We know there's still, these underground markets are still thriving and alive in a certain sense. We know the struggles of what goes on in legalization, or tell me about the mentality you were in, and when you decided you wanted to play in this system. Was it just a love for the plant? Was it a
I'll sum it up as naive optimism.
Okay, yeah, that's
yeah, naive optimism. I had, I didn't have a kid at the turn of legalization, but I didn't want to continue like living with the gigantic weight of like, am I going to jail every year? I had my door kicked in. I've had, I've been arrested. I've had the guns in my face. It's not a fun experience. You get blasted in the newspaper and stuff. Everybody knows your business, and it's not cool. So legalization seemed very appealing, and it was like, oh, we can do this as a job, and we can, keep living our lifestyle. And we didn't realize the level of like what it was going to do to our culture. We didn't realize the level of regulation, and we kind of alluded back when law enforcement came together from all over the place in the camp area, and it kind of was a pissing contest. It really was the same way with agencies overseeing us. There was such a bitter taste in so many agencies' mouths from the green rush and all the exploitation and all the environmental damage that was done. And they felt overwhelmed, and all of a sudden they were given these new tools, this new authority, and they didn't really know whose jurisdiction was what necessarily over cannabis. And so you had all these people coming at you and throwing the book. And as a lot of the bad players disappeared and went away, the only ones left were the good players that were staying here and paying their fines and the fees and paying for the sins of our fathers type thing. And it still was very much us against them, even though there was good players and there was people that care about our land. I mean, we're out here living on our land because we enjoy it. We love waking up with the birds and seeing what the animals are doing during the day, and feeling the different temperatures throughout the year and watching the colors change, and being able to harvest food off of your land and provide for you, and wood, heat, and all this kind of thing. We love this, but we were still viewed as basically the enemy, and low-hanging fruit. If you're hanging out, you're probably paying your bills, so we'll just attach the fines to you. And it was very overwhelming. I had a lawyer that had gotten me, defended me during my raid back in 2010, and he partnered up with some people to start Humboldt Legends, and this was prior to legalization. And he said, okay, this is what's coming. He didn't grasp the whole concept of it either, of how bad it was going to get. But, he prepared me. He said, okay, we just need to make sure that, farms are staying clean, you're staying organic, we want to keep this ethos up, and we're going to promote this, this environmentally friendly, old school, legacy brand. And it just seemed like, oh yeah, let's shoot for the moon. This is wonderful. Let's get this out there. And obviously that didn't happen. It's been a race to the bottom, and corporate chemical commodity flowers everywhere, and just crashed the prices, and everybody just had to take a big step back and look inside, because everybody's story is different, everybody's property is different, and they had to ask themselves, do I want to continue on? Can I continue on? With legalization came, personally, I felt like there's always been a lot more morals and fewer rules, but rules you followed in the traditional market. The handshake meant something. There was, the basic thing was just don't be an asshole. Don't be stealing from people. Don't cause harm. And with legalization, you see companies that are MSOs that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars not paying $7 million out to farms, statewide. Their vendors are getting shafted. People go out of business. There's no bankruptcy in California. So, and the farms are the last ones to get paid, when the weed goes out and the money doesn't come back. And so you see a lot of people that are just struggling because they're putting the time in, the work, 7 days a week, and not guaranteed a paycheck, but yet they have bills. PG&E doesn't understand that, or, grocery store doesn't understand that. So you have to bring in income, and you're putting out more work for so much less right now, if anything.
Do you regret it?
Life changes, right? We're adaptable. I'm kind of this weird internally optimistic guy. I don't know if I'm just stubbornly stupid or what's going on. But I still have hope. I love what we're doing with the Humboldt Family Farms Group. They're making great progress. One foot in front of the other. We need federal legalization. We got to be able to access the people that actually care about sungrown everywhere, not just in California. It's taking a lot longer. It's cost a lot more. It's tons of stress. You dedicate everything to this right now to succeed. So it's, I'm skipping my ski seasons. I'm not on the slopes and enjoying my soul sport. I have a hard time getting a backpack on and getting out in the mountains. I love through hiking. I haven't been doing that in the last few years. Like, it's been really anchored, and trying to make this thing work. Cause I'm at 50, we don't have retirement plans. This is what we do. And win, lose, or draw, we have to try. So for me, there really is no fail option. It's just accept the pains that come with it and navigate and find a way to get through. And, in 2016, 2017, we had 15,000 farms mapped in Humboldt County alone, and we're under 250 right now. And that's, dwindling. We know a lot of people there that this is their last year also.
Aside from the gotta eat and, keep the roof over the head, what keeps you doing this?
I genuinely enjoy it. It every year, we get to experiment with different cultivars. We do some pheno hunting with Happy Dreams Genetics, Mr. D over at Happy Dreams, and Nat up at the Humboldt Seed Company. So we get to play around with some, really stellar genetics, which is fun. We do a little pollen chucking ourselves. We're not breeders. Sometimes we come up with something special. But we love doing pheno hunting for the people that put in the work, and seeing how it's almost like an art form, seeing how they respond to different microclimates. But it's in my soul too. It's in my. I mean, I don't know what else I'd want to do. Like this is what I know. I enjoy it. For all the negatives. I think the negatives are getting less by the year. You still have your surprise inspections and all that unfun stuff, and still get treated like a criminal. But overcoming that and knowing that my son shouldn't have to worry about raids and watching the house get turned over like I did, and having him growing up in more of a normalized viewpoint of the plant, working in education and trying to normalize these things, like what we just did with the Grateful Dead 60. That's the first time in history that the Grateful Dead have had legal cannabis sales at their show, and there was a lot of overhanging. Yeah, there was a lot of rules and regulation around it, more so than a lot of things, because it was kind of their first toe into the endeavor. But it went down well, very well received. We had lines all day long. With
How did that work out? Like, what allowed this to happen?
So our retail partners with Embark, so the Grateful Dead, so they do outside lands. So you have grasslands that's associated with outside lands. GD60 actually just piggybacked the same permit, so they extended the grasslands permit. I mean the outside lands permit. So, they still had very much say in how everything progressed with the grasslands area and how it was marketed and what you could do and what you couldn't do and all those type of things. So they were very, very involved. And there's multiple at that level. There's multiple layers of management groups. And again, one might agree with something, one might not. So you had multiple layers of people you had to appease to make things happen. But it ironed out, and we kept smiling through the whole thing and had a great response and good crowd interactions, and people asked really poignant questions. There were a lot of people that came from out of state for the music and, wanted to talk to you about why Sungrown was great. And those kind of things are awesome. Just having that conversation with somebody, because now they can go carry that conversation on somebody else. And it's very slow and grassroots, but it's genuine and it builds a solid foundation. And it's not like, it's not just like pumping out a fluff brand. We're not just pumping out a bunch of just garbage Mylar and saying, hey, we're the next best Pepsi. It's Humboldt, luckily, for all the great cannabis that's been grown in California and all the great regions that they're around, Humboldt's lucky enough to kind of have that, that quote unquote Coca-Cola brand from way back, so there's a little bit of an advantage there just because you're already known. It's just now you got to live up to the hype. There's been a lot of garbage product that's pumped out of this county for a long time too during the green rush, and that damaged the reputation a bit. So in this era, you can't grow garbage and compete with the big scale guys. You have to have something special. You have to have something craft. You have to have something that's unique for everybody. And, I think the commodity market's kind of focusing on like, one size fits all. And so they just give you some fad genetics and try to have the bud tenders push that down everybody's throat. But we understand that, everybody's an individual, and what you like, maybe, your husband doesn't like, or, somebody else doesn't like. And so we have to grow, 30 plus cultivars, because we want different experiences so we can match you to the plant to you, and give you exactly what you're needing in that moment. If it's something different in the morning versus something different at night, awesome. We want to be able to have that and be able to talk to you about why it's special. We're very terpene focused over THC focused. We grow a lot of strains that are a pain in the butt. That are low yielders, that are high maintenance, late harvesters, maybe mold prone, but we do this because of the individuals. We're leaving money on the table where the corporate guys won't. And we just want to maintain that variety and that connection to the individual. And the plant's an individual. I mean, there's so many expressions in the plant, and it's a very personal thing.
I think that's a very like modern, you know, practice of your outlaw spirit coming forward, honestly, because there have probably been a lot of opportunities for you to either say, fuck this, sell out, just grow for dollars, etc. And I think that outlaw spirit really shows in the integrity that you've continued to bring through these decades. And I've smoked your flower.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of
appreciate
that
it.
northern berry. So,
Oh, yeah, we're harvesting some soon. We got a greenhouse of that coming off real quick.
nice.
Love it.
Yeah, that is that flavor and high was very lovely. So that experience to me, like I there's something about weed that is grown with heart and intention and integrity that actually really truly, like, maybe it's all in my head, but like I feel that in the high and in the experience, and even just the emotional space that it resonates within you when you experience that flower. And that's what I felt from you.
Go pick hand pick a avocado off a tree yourself versus going into Safeway and getting one of those dense, watery, just flavorless. It's the same for tomatoes, whatever. It really is. It's genetics inputs, and the input. It's not just the fertilizers and the amending that you do, but also inputs. How you take care of that plant. Are you out there looking at it every day? Are you one on one with these plants every day? And we have to be. When you're looking at large scale corporate stuff, it's not that way. Everything is mechanized as possible. Contract labor, all this kind of stuff that's happening. So there's a disconnect. It's very much viewed as a commodity. It's just how can we grow this as cheap as possible and increase our margins. And they're cutting corners with inputs and flushing and drying and curing and trimming everything, and it shows up. It just shows up in the end product. You can make something look very beautiful and just artificially beautiful and pump it full of salts and get these, salt grained trichomes on their flower, but it has, very little effect or flavor. It just no wow factor once you smoke it. It's harsh coffee.
Yeah.
We want to avoid all that.
All right, my last question for you. Big picture and looking forward, what is either your greatest vision for where the industry will go in your lifetime, or what's the biggest breakthrough you hope that we see with the plant?
I really enjoy the synergy that we're having with the music industry right now. I have always felt like music and cannabis have been so synergetic, and one's the muse for the other, and it's I would like to see that part of it continue. As a lot of artists out there, musicians, what's going on in the industry with them right now is they're doing all the work and they're making very little money. Everything is so top heavy right now, and they're up against so much with AI and these streaming services and stuff. And it's a lot like the farmers as the artists. They're doing all this work. They're putting all their love to create something, with so little given back. And so when you're able to like share flower with musicians, like they appreciate it, and then they get creative, and you can like hear them transition, into the studio and create music and their art, while ingesting your art. And that part has been always really cool to me. The compassion side of things, we do a lot of compassion work with cancer patients and that type of stuff, and it's all 100% free. It's just pure. We don't want any form of monetary perversion just to even enter that equation at all. We just want it to be, this plant is magical. It can heal. If you need it, let's get it to you, and increase quality of life. And that's been a pure smile. You're just stepping out of the industrial complex that this thing's become, and that kind of makes you a little nostalgic back to the old days. You know, it just purifies what we're doing again, and you get genuine thank yous instead of do more, pay more, which is what we hear on the other side of the fence.
Mm. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. I really appreciate you sharing and yeah, giving us kind of a peek into your world. I know it's harvest right now, so you got a lot going on today. So thank you so
I'm,
much for being here.
yeah, absolutely. We're gonna get up there and get some flowers hung in the dry room today.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it, everybody. Check out Full Moon Farms if you're in California, guys.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.